Good morning and welcome to episode of 56 of Mystery, Murder, and Magic. I hope y'all had a good weekend. I didn't do a whole lot of anything. Just kind of took it easy. But sometimes you need to do nothing. Just be, Now, before we get into today's episode, I just want to share what I found on the Harmony Montgomery case. An article that was released on Friday by the Daily Beast is reporting that the arrest of Harmony's dad, Adam, and her stepmom, Kayla, are 2 years too late, according to her great-uncle, Kevin Montgomery. Now, as you may recall, Adam was arrested on Tuesday, and that was of last week. But he was on charges of abuse relating to Harmony. And on Wednesday, Kayla was arrested for using Harmony to continue collecting food stamp benefits, even though Harmony hadn't been living with her. Now, Kevin's biggest frustration in all this is that in 2019, when the abuse was brought to the authorities' attention, he wasn't taken seriously. And I haven't found any information on why those allegations were not investigated, but maybe that just hasn't been information that's been released yet. And I was hoping to have more information for today's episode, but it's been a bit slow over the weekend when it, with anything with that case. So moving on to today's episode, cold cases have always intrigued me, especially those that are solved decades after they first happened. And I love that families can be given some closure and maybe even some justice when a loved one has been murdered. Not all cold cases have a happy ending. And the one we're talking about today is one of those.
It's Monday, and that means it's time for a new episode of Mystery, Murder, and Magic. And here's your host, Andrea Lee, and sometimes Alex.
All right, y'all. Sometimes, several times we've talked about small town charm, and the town that we're talking about today is one of those. It's the town of Ina, Illinois. And that's the town that everyone knows everyone. And it's a lot like Whitmire, where I live, because it only has the one red light. There's a gas station, a Baptist church, and a mom and pop grill. Now, it sounds like a nice, quiet town to raise a family in, right? Well, that's what Keith and Elaine Dardeen thought when they moved to Ina in 1986. The couple, along with their son Peter, lived in a mobile home just outside of town. Keith worked at the local water treatment plant, and Elaine worked at a supply store. And it wasn't long before Elaine found out that she was pregnant with a little girl that they planned naming Casey. Now, it was also during that time that Keith became to feel uneasy, unsafe in their little town, because even though at first they thought it was a safe, sleepy little town, there had been 15 murders in the past 2 years there. It wasn't long before there was a for sale sign up in their yard, and Keith even told his mom that he hoped to be moved by the following January. Maybe it was that the family was growing and he wanted to protect them all that had him wanting to move away. But for whatever reason, Keith couldn't get out there soon enough. And he couldn't. On November 17th, 1987, Keith didn't show up for work, and he didn't call out. And that was highly uncharacteristic for Keith. Co-workers were unable to get a hold of Keith Lane, so his parents were contacted. Well, they were startled, so they drove down with a key that they had to the family's mobile home, and the police met them there. Keith's car wasn't at the house, so they decided to go inside to investigate. What they found in there was unspeakable horror. Elaine had been beaten to death with a baseball bat. And not only that, she had been sexually mutilated. Beside her, little Peter had met the same fate. And somewhere in the course of the brutal murder, Casey, who was due in 2 months, had been born and beaten to death also. Now, Keith, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found. Now, had this been like a robbery gone brutally wrong? Police didn't think so because valuables were out in plain view, undisturbed. There was no evidence of a forced entry into the home, so just where the heck was Keith? Well, naturally, Keith became their number one suspect, as is often the situation in such cases. I mean, at the time, it did look awfully suspicious because his wife and 2 children were beaten to death, and he was nowhere to be found. It looked like he had committed the crime and then skipped town. Well, that's what they thought in the beginning of the investigation, but that theory didn't last long because the following day, Keith's body was found in a field by hunters. He had been shot 3 times in the face, and like his wife and son, he had also been sexually mutilated. Can't imagine finding a body at all, but especially in that state, Now, that field that his body had been found in was only about a mile from the Dardeen home. Police believe the family was killed the day before they were found, and they all died around the same time. The following day, the family car was found, and you'll never believe where they found it, y'all. The killer or killers had parked it right in front of the Benton Police Department, and right beside it was the Franklin County Courthouse. Now, all of that was about 10 miles down the road from the Dardeen home. And the car, it was splattered with blood. But who on earth could do something so heinous to such a sweet family? Especially to those 2 little kids, y'all. I mean, one of them was just a newborn. That's just heartless. As you can imagine, the residents of the little town of Ina were on edge. They weren't sure if this was just random killing and the killer had moved on, or if the killer was somewhere in their presence, hiding in plain sight, just waiting to attack their next victim. And when you hear of sexual mutilation, it often leads you to believe that it was some type of sacrificial or ritualistic killings. Authorities were working around the clock trying to solve this case and bring the killer or killers to justice. 30 investigators were working the case full time. Thousands of leads came in that led to nowhere. Hundreds and hundreds of people were interviewed. They took in a lot of evidence, and they locked those, and some were sent to labs for testing along with DNA samples, but the only DNA samples they had were the victims. There was just so very little to go on, and eventually the case went cold. Now, over the years, people in the town formed their own theories. Some people thought it was very personal killing, and others thought the killer was trying to send a message. Friends of Keith were sure that no one had it out for Keith and his family. He was known as this very well-liked man. It was hard for any of his friends to imagine that someone would want Keith and his family dead. Now, the thing about this case is that in most cases, you'd have a suspect or a person of interest. Maybe you can't find them, but you know who they are. You know who you're looking for. They didn't even have that in this case. But then a man named Tommy Lynn Sells came into the pictures. Sells was already serving time in prison for the murder of a 13-year-old girl named Kayleen Harris, whose throat he had slit. And in the process of that murder, he had also slit the throat of a 10-year-old girl named Crystal Searles, but Crystal survived her attack. She helped with the composing of a sketch of Sayles. She picked him out of a police lineup, and she testified against him in court. Well, that was just a drop in the bucket of murder Sayles had committed, according to Sayles himself. He admitted to killing as many as 70 people across the country. Kaylin Harris and Crystal Searles' attack had been in Del Rio, Texas, but he claimed that his nickname was Coast to Coast because he had murdered from coast to coast. And of course, police investigated his claims, but they found only about a dozen of them to be true. Because, like many other murderers, he had the habit of embellishing his stories and adding numbers to his actual kill streak. People from other police, I'm sorry about that, it's early, y'all. Police from other towns wanted to know if Sayles had ever come through their towns, and Ina was one of those he was asked about. Well, he had, in fact, been to Ina. He started giving details about the Dardeen's murder, but each time he told his story, he changed it. One time he said he met Keith at a truck stop, and the next time he said he had met him at a pool hall, and Keith had invited him over to the Dardeen's home for some dinner and a little fun in the bedroom with both of the Dardeen's. But when police questioned him about some of the details that had never been released to the public, Sayles gave the wrong answers. But he did provide investigators with a detail that had never been publicly released. He talked about a ceramic set of watermelon decor in the Dardeen home, and that convinced the Ina police that they had their killer. For him to have known that that set of watermelons was in the Dardeen home, he had to have been in the home at one point. But Sayles was never charged with the murders of Keith, Elaine, Peter, or Casey. Jefferson County State Attorney said there was just too many inconsistencies differing from what Sayles claimed and what were actual facts in the case, so he decided not to charge Sayles. Now, Sayles was executed for his other crimes in 2014, so did he kill the family or not? And that's something that went to the grave with him. And Keith's mom, Joanne, believes that Sayles did kill her family. She told News 14 in the past that she's 99% sure that he did kill them. The only doubt that she has is wondering if somebody helped him, but she's sure that he committed the murders. Now, I've been thinking about this case for a while. No one that the authorities talked to had anything bad to say about the Dardeen family. They were nice people. Was maybe this like a case of mistaken identity? Had the killers targeted the wrong family? But who would be the right family for a murder so heinous? I mean, really, who would be the right people for that? Now, there's breakthroughs in forensic technology all the time, so hopefully sooner than later, a killer will be identified in this case, whether it was Sayles or someone else. Now, the surviving family members of the Dardeens deserve at least that. Now, it goes without saying, but this case is on my list to keep an eye on. And if there's anything new that comes out about it, I'll be back with an update. That's all that I have for today's episode. I do want to remind y'all that this podcast is available on YouTube. And if that's where you listen, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. We'll appreciate it so much. Now, I'll be back on Wednesday morning with the Midweek Mini. And in the meantime, if anything pops up, I'll go live with it. If it's, breaking news that I feel like I need to share. Y'all have a good week.